Hey everybody, welcome to module number 5. I like to call this one Between Traditions or Tackling Traditions. In this module, we're reading stories from 2 African authors from countries that were colonized by the British. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the author of Wedding at the Cross, comes from Kenya, and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, the author of The Headstrong Historian, comes from Nigeria. In this module, we'll be exploring these 2 post-colonial texts. Now, the term post-colonial is used to describe cultures that had been colonized by another. So when a nation like England, for instance, colonizes another nation, many significant aspects of life change for the native people. The colonizing country gains control of the economy, and to succeed economically, one must assimilate into the colonizer's culture. The colonizing country also takes control of other institutions in the colonized nation, like schools. The history that is taught in colonial schools tends to glorify the colonizer and make the native people out to be less civilized. In both Nigeria and Kenya, the use of English becomes a mark of status and the key to any upward social mobility, even when people speak their native languages at home. Also, the colonizing culture enforces their religious beliefs onto the native people, so they are Christianized, and the native beliefs are even at times looked down upon as mere superstition. So, the effect of colonization involves one culture being imposed upon another. In this case, the British culture on African culture, either native Kenyan or native Nigerian. So, the people we read about in these stories from Nigeria and Kenya are navigating 2 traditions, their native tradition and the British tradition that is imposed upon them. Post-colonial subjects live in these 2 worlds, these 2 traditions that are often in conflict because the native culture is systematically oppressed by a privileged foreign culture. So let's look closely at these 2 stories so we can see the tension between the 2 traditions. Ngugi wa Thiong'o's story Wedding at the Cross was published in 1975. In this story, the young Kenyan girl Miriamu falls in love with the fun-loving, rebellious boy Waruyuki. Miriamu's father, however, does not approve of him. Her father has taken on an English name, Douglas Jones, and many British customs. Jones raised his daughter Miriamu with proper British manners in accordance with such books as the Right Reverend Clive Schomburg's British Manners for Africans. Mr. Jones wants his daughter to marry someone who can support her, and Waruyuki makes very little at his working-class job. After this traumatic meeting with her parents, Waruyuki starts to change. He eventually enters the military, and when the Mau Mau rebellion breaks out and rebels are put into camps, Waruyuki, along with other collaborators, are able to buy up land and prosper because of their collaboration with the British. Out of gratitude for his good fortune, Waruyuki joins the Christian church and becomes a recognized elder in the church. Here, he completes his assimilation into the British African that Douglas Jones always wanted. He is baptized Dodge W. Livingstone Jr. I think Ngugi is trying to imply here that this identity is artificially made, something made of stone that he's trying to bring to life. Now, a successful businessman, he can have that Christian wedding, that wedding at the cross that Douglas Jones wanted. But in the end, Miriamu says no. She wanted to marry Waruyuki, and Waruyuki is now dead. Waruyuki's contact with British culture has changed him so drastically that Miriamu no longer recognized the Waruyuki she fell in love with. Waruyuki assimilates to the colonizer's culture and is able to grow his wealth and social status because of it. He loses, however, the love of his life. Next, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's The Headstrong Historian tells the story of Nwamga, a Nigerian grandmother who throughout her life resists the influence of the colonizing British. She originally sends her son to learn English at the Catholic mission so that he can win in a court in a land dispute with his cousins. The courts are controlled by the British, and being able to speak English would be an advantage because English speakers are given the benefit of the doubt over those who can't speak English. Her son, Anikenwa, from this point onward begins to change. He no longer wants to eat the food she serves. He becomes used to wearing Western-style clothes. He changes his name to Michael and marries a Christian girl, Mbeke, who seems weak to Nwamga. And then they have a daughter named Grace, or, as her grandmother Nwamga calls her, Afamefuna, who, as an adult, rejects a lot of the British customs she was taught for native customs. We see the effects of the imposition of British culture on many characters in this story, but Nwamga remains tied to the Nigerian ways she was raised in. She is like a root tying Grace to her African heritage. In this story, we see characters living in two cultures. Notice, too, that parts of the characters' lives that are affected the most by British culture is education, the courts and legal proceedings, and there's also a certain class status associated with British customs as well. So as you read through both stories, think about the dual traditions the characters inhabit, the African and the British. Where do we see customs that are particular to African traditions? And where do we see customs that are British? How does the invading British culture infiltrate the characters' lives? What parts of the characters' daily lives are affected by British colonization? Remember, the process of colonization involves establishing control over the economy, institutions like schools and hospitals, the legal system, religion, and of course, language. In your discussion board post, look closely at these post-colonial characters that live in these two traditions, and describe how they relate to each one. I think you'll notice that the colonizing culture is associated with power and authority, and knowledge of its customs usually grant a person more social agency, more wealth, and more status. These benefits are often at the cost of one's heritage and sense of community, because the imposing British culture creates conflicts in the characters' lives. I hope you enjoy the reading, and I look forward to reading your thoughts on the discussion board. I'll see you there.